The mysterious signal. Dark Sky Observatory, 2:37 a.m. Outside the glass window, the night sky shimmered with countless stars, the universe seemingly holding its breath. But inside the observatory, something was disturbing the silence. The crackling sound of radio waves. Elliot Carter struggled to keep his eyes open, his fingers gliding over the control panel. Cosmic signals were unpredictable. They could be anything from a distant supernova to an echo from millions of years ago. But this time something was different. 1420 megahertz frequency, one of the key radio bands astronomers monitored for potential extraterrestrial contact. And right now, a distinct signal had emerged. It wasn't the sound of a galaxy. It wasn't the echo of a dying planet. It was a voice, a woman's voice, soft, almost like a whisper drifting across the vast emptiness of space. Is there someone out there? Elliot's heart nearly stopped. He quickly adjusted the equipment, increasing the signal clarity. The waveform on the screen fluctuated wildly, but the voice remained steady, gentle yet clear, as if someone was standing right beside him. Elliot, can anyone hear me? He froze. She had just said his name. Impossible. This signal was coming from deep space. No one beyond Earth should know who he was. He ran a diagnostic on the system, ensuring this wasn't some elaborate hoax or terrestrial interference. But no, the signal was originating from outside the solar system. Elliot grabbed the microphone, forcing himself to stay calm. This is Elliot Carter. Who are you? A long silence. He almost thought he had imagined it all. But then, the voice returned. Elliot, you can hear me. I've been waiting for so long. I need your help. He had never heard a voice like this before. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't an artificial construct. It had emotion. It had presence. And it was pleading with him. Elliot quickly calculated the coordinates of the signal's origin. It was coming from a distant region of the galaxy, a place no human had ever explored. He scanned the data, trying to estimate the distance. This signal had traveled thousands of years to reach him. And yet the voice, it carried no signs of distortion. It sounded as if it were being transmitted live. A wild thought crossed his mind. What if this wasn't just a signal drifting through space? What if it was directed specifically at him? Elliot hesitated, his hand hovering over the microphone. If he continued this conversation, there was no turning back. He had spent his entire life searching for proof of extraterrestrial life. But now that it was right in front of him, he felt something unexpected. Fear. Should he answer her? Should he engage in a conversation that could change everything? He swallowed hard, then pressed the microphone button. I'm listening. What's your name? A pause, then the voice returned, soft but carrying an inexplicable sadness. I am Selara. A shiver ran down Elliot's spine. He didn't know what he had just stepped into, but one thing was certain. His life would never be the same again. Who is talking to him? Dark Sky Observatory, 2:42 a.m. Outside, the night sky remained still, millions of stars glittering against the endless dark expanse. But inside the small observatory, everything felt different. Elliot had never felt like this before. He gripped the microphone tightly, his eyes locked onto the screen where the signal waves continued to fluctuate. On the other end, a voice was waiting for him, a voice that did not belong to Earth. I am Selara. Elliot tried to keep his voice steady, but his heartbeat was racing. Selara, where are you? A brief pause. Then the voice returned, soft as a whisper carried across the universe. Somewhere very far away. Too far for you to see me. Elliot quickly scanned the data on his screen, where the coordinates of the signal fluctuated wildly. The source lay beyond the solar system, far past any known planet ever studied by humankind. But her voice was too clear. It didn't sound like a transmission that had drifted across millions of light years. She was speaking to him in real time. That was impossible. And yet, it was happening. Elliot swallowed hard, trying to push down the growing unease inside him. How do you know my name? This time, Selara didn't answer immediately. A silence stretched between them, as if she was hesitating, deciding whether to tell the truth. Then, her voice came through again. I have been watching you for some time. Elliot tensed. Watching me? I didn't mean to frighten you, she said softly, but there was an exhaustion in her voice. I didn't have much of a choice. A chill ran down his spine. Elliot had spent his life studying cosmic signals, always believing that if humanity ever found another civilization, we would be the ones to make first contact. But now the opposite had happened. And not only that, she had been watching him. Elliot stared at his monitor, scanning the data. There was no sign of interference, no indication that this was a hoax or some elaborate trick. He took a deep breath and asked the one question gnawing at his mind. Why me? Selara sighed softly. Because I need help, and you are the only one who can hear me. A shiver ran down Elliot's spine. A creeping fear seeped into his thoughts. Not fear of Selara, but fear of what lay behind her plea for help. Just then something strange happened. On the screen, the signal data began fluctuating wildly. The frequency waves distorted as if another presence was interfering with their conversation. Elliot narrowed his eyes, his fingers flying over the keyboard, trying to analyze the interference. Hold on. Something else is listening in on us. Selara immediately fell silent. Then her voice returned, tense, urgent. Could you be monitored? Elliot froze. A cold chill settled over him. He had never considered that possibility. But if Selara had found him, then could something else have found him too? Elliot quickly checked the communication system. He tried to trace the source of the interference, but it wasn't coming from any known terrestrial device. It wasn't human. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. He was no longer alone. Selara's voice returned, more urgent than before. Elliot, you must be careful. If I could find you, then so can they. His breath caught in his throat. They? Who are they? Selara's next words were barely above a whisper, as if she feared someone was already listening. The ones who destroyed my world. Elliot felt his entire body go rigid. This had started as a simple conversation, but now he realized he might have stepped into something far greater than he ever imagined. An annihilated civilization, an extraterrestrial woman begging for help, and another force lurking in the dark, watching him. Elliot clenched the microphone, trying to steady himself. He knew that if he continued speaking to Selara, he might be putting himself in danger. But if he ignored her, she might not survive. He took a deep breath, then made his choice. Selara, I won't leave you behind. A brief silence, then her voice returned, filled with something new, relief. Thank you, Elliot. He didn't know what he had just stepped into, but one thing was clear. There was no turning back. He had made his choice. The Mystery of Selara, Dark Sky Observatory, 3:05 a.m. The dim glow from the computer screen was the only light left in the small room, casting shadows on Elliot's tense face. Everything felt surreal, too impossible to be real, yet too vivid to be a hoax. He had spent his entire life searching for an extraterrestrial signal, and now it had not only appeared, but had called his name, begging for help. Who was Selara, and why could she communicate with him? Elliot sat down, adjusting the microphone. He took a deep breath before speaking. Selara, I need the truth. On the other end, her voice came through, still soft as a breeze, but carrying a newfound heaviness. I know. I'll tell you, but I'm not sure if you'll want to hear it. Elliot swallowed hard. He had come this far. There was no turning back now. I'm ready. A long silence stretched between them. Then, Selara whispered, as if recalling something buried deep in the darkness of time. My planet is gone. Elliot froze. He stared at the screen, watching the fluctuating waveforms dance wildly, as if they too were reacting to her words. He had always imagined that when humanity found another civilization, they would discover a world full of life, thriving cities, unknown cultures. But Selara wasn't speaking of a world that existed. She was speaking of one that had been erased. Elliot took a slow breath. What happened? Selara hesitated. Then her voice returned, laced with an undeniable sorrow. My planet, Lyra 7, was once beautiful. It orbited a blue star, its skies filled with cascading lights beyond anything you could ever imagine. We existed for millions of years until they came. A chill crawled down Elliot's spine. He already knew the answer, but he had to ask. Who are they? Selara exhaled, and for the first time, her voice trembled. The ones who destroyed my world. Elliot forced himself to stay calm. Can you be more specific? Who did this? Selara hesitated. Then she spoke a name Elliot had never heard before. Yet somehow he knew it wasn't just words. Dravxir. The room felt colder the moment she said it. Elliot didn't know why, but his instinct screamed that this wasn't just some alien race. Dravxir. The ones who had wiped out an entire planet. And if they could do that to Lyra 7, what was stopping them from doing the same to Earth? Elliot sat in silence, his mind racing to process everything. Then a question surfaced, one he could no longer ignore. He leaned closer to the microphone, his voice steady. Selara, if you're the only survivor, how are you able to contact me? On the other end, Selara let out a faint, bitter laugh. Do you really think I chose you? Elliot stiffened. The waveforms on the screen spiked erratically as she continued, her voice carrying a new intensity. I had no choice. I am trapped in this signal. It's the only thing left of me. Elliot felt a weight settle in his chest. What do you mean? Selara whispered. I no longer have a physical body. Elliot held his breath. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. You're saying you're just a signal? Selara let out a sad chuckle. Not exactly. I am my consciousness, preserved in energy. When my planet fell, I was sent into space, into the endless frequencies of the universe, hoping someone, somewhere would find me. Elliot was speechless. He felt an indescribable sorrow. A living being, an intelligent, sentient entity, trapped inside her own transmission, drifting endlessly through space, desperately searching for someone to listen. Could he even comprehend that kind of isolation? Thousands of years lost among the stars, waiting for someone to hear her. Elliot gripped the microphone, his voice quieter now. I hear you. A pause. Then for the first time, Selara's voice carried a fragile hope. And you are the only one who ever has. Just then, the signal distorted. The data on the screen spiked erratically, warning of an external interference. Elliot's gut twisted as realization hit him. Selara, we're not alone anymore. A moment of silence. Then her voice returned, this time filled with fear. Elliot, you need to leave. If they found you, you are no longer safe. Elliot clenched his jaw. Who? Who's looking for me? Selara whispered. The Dravxir. At that moment, a violent electromagnetic pulse surged through the system. All the screens went black. The signal vanished, and Elliot was alone. Threat from the cosmos. Dark Sky Observatory, 3:12 a.m. All the screens went black. The static from the speakers was gone. The observatory, already silent before, now felt suffocating. Elliot stood frozen, his eyes locked onto the dead monitors. What just happened? He had lost Selara's signal, but more importantly, something else had broken into the system. An unknown force had just tried to sever their connection. And if Selara was right, then it could be the Dravxir. Elliot frantically attempted to reboot the system, but every time he entered a command, the screens flickered erratically. Files were being scrambled, and some of the data on Selara's signal had been completely erased. His hands clenched into fists. No, this isn't possible. Someone or something had attacked his system, not in a way a human hacker would, but in a way only an intelligence beyond Earth could. A shiver ran down his spine. They had found him. At that moment, his phone buzzed. An email. No sender. No traceable address. Subject, shut down your system. They are watching. Elliot's pulse spiked. He opened it. There was only one line. If you continue searching for that signal, you won't be a scientist anymore. You will be a target. Elliot's hands clenched into fists. Then a chilling realization struck him. What if this wasn't just about Selara? What if, by making contact, he had accidentally given Dravxir a path to Earth? A warning. But from who? The government? A secret organization? Or the very ones who had just infiltrated his system? Elliot felt the weight of realization settle in. This was no longer about scientific discovery. This was now a hunt. And he was the prey. Elliot took a deep breath. He couldn't let fear control him. Selara had lost everything. Her voice was the only thing she had left, drifting through the cosmos, hoping someone would hear her. And he had heard her. He had promised not to abandon her. No matter who was trying to silence him, no matter who was tracking his every move, he would not stop. He powered the system back on, determined to recover the signal. But just as he was about to input the command, the power cut out. The room plunged into total darkness. Elliot shot up from his chair, heart pounding. He stepped outside the observatory, scanning the horizon. The town below was still lit. Only the observatory had lost power. This wasn't an accident. This was a warning. He swallowed hard and moved quickly toward the equipment locker. He grabbed a portable radio transmitter, a backup system capable of sending out signals manually. He had to try again. He had to reach Selara before it was too late. Gripping the microphone tightly, he took a shaky breath before speaking. Selara, if you're still out there, give me a sign. Silence. He bit his lip, forcing himself to stay calm. Then, a faint static crackled through, a weak signal. Then her voice distorted and fading. Elliot, run. He froze. What did you say? Selara's voice returned, this time urgent. They know. They're coming. Boom! The main entrance to the observatory shook violently. Someone was outside. A rush of adrenaline surged through Elliot. He grabbed the essentials, the hard drive containing Selara's data, the radio transmitter, and a small crystalline fragment he had unconsciously picked up from a meteorite sample months ago. Boom! The door was hit again. Heavy footsteps echoed against the concrete floor. Elliot's breathing quickened. No more time. He had to escape. But the only question left was, who was waiting for him outside? Selara is not the only one. Dark Sky Observatory. 3:27 a.m. Boom. The front door shook violently as something slammed against it again, rattling under the weight of those trying to break in. Elliot took a deep breath, feeling the rapid pounding of his heart against his ribs. There was no time to think. He had to run. Elliot slowly backed toward the emergency exit, his eyes locked on the trembling door. Who were they? Government agents? A secret organization? Or something else entirely? From outside, a deep mechanical voice crackled through a loudspeaker. Elliot Carter, we know you're in there. Open the door now. A chill ran down Elliot's spine. That voice, it wasn't human. Not entirely. His fingers curled into fists as he took another step back. Whoever they were, he could not let himself be caught. Boom! The door burst open, shards of wood splintering across the floor. Elliot didn't hesitate. He turned and bolted for the back exit. Then his radio crackled to life. Selara's voice. Elliot, don't go through the back. They've already blocked all exits. He froze. She could see this? He lifted the radio, his voice low and urgent. Where are you? A brief silence. Then she whispered, I'm very close to you. Elliot didn't have time to think. Instead, he jumped over the steel railing of the emergency stairs, dropping onto the damp ground below. He crouched, holding his breath, blending into the shadows. From a distance, he saw them, black armored figures sweeping the area with glowing visors and scanning devices. They weren't police. They weren't military. They were something else. Elliot narrowed his eyes, analyzing them carefully. Each figure wore sleek, form-fitting armor, glowing faintly under the moonlight. Their weapons, nothing like Earth's technology. One of them lifted a hand to their earpiece, activating a communication link. We lost him. He must have been warned. A second voice responded through the radio. It doesn't matter. He won't get far, and he's not the only one we're looking for. Elliot's breath caught in his throat. Not the only one. They weren't just hunting him. They were hunting someone else. And then, a strange cold breeze brushed against his skin. Elliot turned sharply, and there, standing before him, was a glowing, ethereal figure. Elliot couldn't believe his eyes. She wasn't just a voice anymore. She was here. Selara stood before him, her presence shimmering softly under the moonlight. Her long, flowing hair floated weightlessly as if untouched by gravity. Her silver eyes gleamed like twin stars, radiating a soft, otherworldly glow. But most of all, she wasn't entirely solid. Her form flickered slightly as though trapped between two realities. She was still caught within her own signal. Elliot was speechless, but Selara didn't wait for him to process. Elliot, we have to leave. Now! He blinked, trying to ground himself in reality. You're actually here? She nodded slightly, but her gaze darted toward the approaching figures. They'll detect me soon. If they catch you, they'll get to me too. Elliot clenched his fists. Everything was spiraling beyond anything he had ever imagined. But if Selara was real, if she wasn't just a drifting signal in space, he couldn't let them take her. He locked eyes with her and gave a firm nod. Then let's run. Selara's lips curled into a faint smile. Part relief, part determination. She lifted her hand. A brilliant silver light surged around them, and in an instant, they vanished. The final message, somewhere deep in the wilderness, 3:55 a.m. The world around Elliot blurred, as if he had been pulled through a tunnel of light. No more observatory, no more pursuers. Then everything settled. Elliot gasped for air, his entire body shaken as if he had been ripped apart and stitched back together. He stumbled, his knees hitting the damp ground. In front of him, Selara knelt down, her silver eyes filled with concern. Are you all right? Elliot looked up at her, his breath still uneven. What the hell just happened? Selara hesitated, lowering her gaze. I pulled you out of there, but I can't hold this form for long. Elliot stared at her. Now under the pale moonlight, he could see her more clearly. She wasn't fully here. Selara's skin still glowed faintly, but her body flickered slightly, shifting like a holographic mirage. She wasn't a ghost. She wasn't human. She was something in between. Elliot swallowed hard. You're not a physical being, are you? Selara held his gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded. Not completely. I no longer belong to the physical world, but I haven't disappeared either. A shiver ran down Elliot's spine. She existed, but not fully. But if she wasn't here, then where was she? Selara took a slow breath, as if searching for the right way to explain something beyond human understanding. Elliot, I am not just a drifting signal. I was sent. Elliot blinked. Sent? What do you mean? Selara gazed up at the sky, her expression distant. When my planet fell, I couldn't escape in a ship. There was nowhere left to go. She hesitated, her voice trembling. The only thing that remained was my consciousness. Elliot felt a chill spread through his body. You're just pure energy? Selara gave a sad smile. I once had a body. I once had a life. But when my world was destroyed, the last of my people found a way to preserve me like this. Elliot said nothing. He had always imagined that if humans found alien life, it would be a thriving civilization, a world full of wonders and technology. But what he had found was a lost soul drifting among the stars. Selara let out a soft, hollow laugh. Do you know what the worst part is, Elliot? He remained silent. Selara took a breath, her voice barely a whisper. Knowing that I still exist, but I can never truly touch this world again. Elliot clenched his fists. He wanted to say something, anything, but all he could do was ask the one question that had been haunting him. Why did you find me? Selara's silver eyes softened, her lips curling into the faintest of smiles. Because you were the only one who could hear me, Elliot frowned. But why? I can't be the only one listening to deep space radio signals. Selara nodded. You're not, but none of them had the connection. Elliot's pulse quickened. Connection? Selara stepped closer, raising a hand as if to touch him, but she couldn't. Elliot, I didn't just find you by chance. There's something inside you, a frequency that only you can perceive, something I can't explain. Elliot's breath hitched. Are you saying I was born with this ability? Selara hesitated, then whispered. Or perhaps you were always meant to find me. Elliot's heartbeat pounded. He had always thought this was a random signal. But what if he had been chosen? What if his entire life, His obsession with the stars wasn't because he was searching for something, but because something had been searching for him. Suddenly, Selara snapped her head toward the distance. Elliot instinctively followed her gaze. Far beyond the trees, red lights flickered in the dark. They were still hunting him. Solara's voice dropped to a whisper, urgent. Elliot, I don't have much time left. They can sense me, even though I'm not in this world. Elliot swallowed hard. You're saying they can capture you, even if you're just a signal? Selara nodded. They have the technology to trap me and turn me into a weapon. Elliot clenched his fists. He didn't understand everything about her, but he knew she was afraid, and he couldn't let them take her. What do I need to do? Selara turned back to him, her silver eyes shining with trust. You need to leave, and you need to find a way to bring me back. Elliot froze. Bring you back? What does that mean? Selara smiled, mysterious yet hopeful. You'll know soon. And then, the silver light around her began to fade. She was disappearing. Elliot lunged forward, trying to grab her, but his hands passed through empty air. Selara, don't go! She looked at him one last time, whispering softly. Find me, Elliot. Then she was gone. Elliot stood alone in the darkened forest. The shadows closed in around him. But in his heart, one thing was clear. He wouldn't stop. He would find a way, and he wouldn't let her disappear forever. Elliot's decision. Dark sky observatory. 5:12 a.m. dawn was breaking. A faint glow stretched across the horizon, yet Elliot felt no warmth from the light. Inside the observatory, everything remained silent. But Elliot was not. Selara was gone. Her final words echoed in his mind. Find me, Elliot. He couldn't stop thinking about it. Couldn't shake the feeling that this was a point of no return. He had two choices. Walk away, go back to being a normal astronomer. Pretend this encounter never happened. Follow her trail. But that meant leaving behind everything he knew, accepting that his life would never be the same. But did he really have a choice? Elliot's eyes dropped to the workstation, where the radio equipment lay motionless. The signal was gone, but something remained, a small silver crystal, the one Selara had left before disappearing. Elliot picked it up, running his fingers over its cool, glass-like surface. It wasn't like any mineral he had ever seen. Perhaps this was the key. He studied it closely, whispering, You left this for me, didn't you? No answer. But when the first rays of sunlight slipped through the window, the crystal reacted, refracting light in a strange, unnatural way. A series of symbols appeared on the desk beneath it. Elliot narrowed his eyes. This wasn't random. It was coordinates. He quickly entered the numbers into his computer system, tracking their location. The screen processed for a few seconds. Then when the result came up, Elliot froze. Impossible. The coordinates did not lead to any known planetary system. They pointed to a void, a region of space where there were no stars, no planets. Nothing. But if there was nothing there, then why had Selara sent him this? His heartbeat quickened. She wouldn't have left meaningless coordinates. There was something there, a clue, or maybe Selara herself. Elliot ran a hand through his hair, his thoughts racing. If he followed these coordinates, he wouldn't be coming back. He would have to leave Earth, leave everything, his career, his friends, his life, all to chase a voice across the universe, a voice he had never even touched. Did he really believe in this? Or was this just an illusion, a fantasy he had created for himself? Elliot stood up, looking out the window. Earth kept turning. People were still sleeping. No one knew that a voice from another world had whispered to him, that an entire civilization had been lost, that somewhere a being was still waiting. Only he knew. And if he did nothing, maybe no one would ever know Selara had existed. No one would save her. Elliot took a deep breath. He had spent his entire life searching for something out there, and now that it had found him, he couldn't turn his back on it. Elliot turned back to his desk, opening an old file on his computer. An unfinished project, one he had started years ago, but never had the chance to complete. A ship. Not a traditional spacecraft, but a quantum-based propulsion system inspired by the energy readings from meteorites he had studied. It had never been tested, but if it worked, it could take him to wherever those coordinates led. Adrenaline surged through him. He wouldn't wait anymore. He was going to find Selara, even if it meant leaving Earth behind, even if it meant facing things he couldn't comprehend. He wouldn't stop. And so, he began to prepare. Journey into space. A hidden underground facility, 11:45 p.m. Elliot was running out of time. He had spent the entire day preparing, gathering data, verifying coordinates, and making sure everything was ready for a journey with no return ticket. In front of him, a sleek, advanced-looking ship sat motionless in the shadows of an abandoned hangar. This was the first vessel designed using the quantum propulsion theory he had studied, technology no one had dared to test before. But now it was his only hope. He took a deep breath, glancing up through the glass dome above. Selara was out there, and he wouldn't let her wait any longer. Elliot climbed into the control cabin, the dim glow of instrument panels flickering to life as he powered up the ship. His fingers moved quickly across the console, checking every system: oxygen levels, power reserves, navigational accuracy. No errors. He exhaled deeply, then entered the coordinates Selara had left for him. Immediately, the ship's AI scanned the vastness of space, locking onto a specific trajectory. A path of light appeared on the main screen, a route cutting through the void, leading to a destination no human had ever set foot upon. There was no turning back now. Elliot activated his comms, his voice barely above a whisper. "Selara, I'm coming." He initiated the launch sequence. A deep hum vibrated through the ship's frame. Below the facility, a massive underground hatch slid open, revealing a hidden launch tunnel leading into the night sky. Elliot clenched his jaw, gripping the controls. One last breath. Then he pushed the throttle forward. Boom! The ship shot upward, piercing through the layers of Earth's atmosphere in mere seconds. Elliot felt the crushing force of acceleration. His body pressed against the seat, but he focused only on one thing: breaking free. Within moments, he had left Earth far behind. Through the ship's viewport, the universe stretched before him, an infinite, uncharted sea of stars, swirling galaxies, and distant celestial bodies. He was now where no one had ever ventured before. No gravity, no borders. Only him, his ship, and a singular goal: finding Selara. Elliot's eyes remained fixed on the coordinates. Everything was on course. Then, something changed. The ship's monitoring systems flickered. The navigation data glitched. A cold sensation ran down his spine. No, it couldn't be. He activated his communicator, his voice tense. "Selara, can you hear me?" For a long moment, only silence. Then, a voice responded. But it wasn't Selara. A deep, chilling voice, one that carried an eerie sense of command. "You should not have come here." Elliot's entire body tensed. He had been found. In front of him, space itself began to distort. Something massive was emerging from the void. A ship, but not like any human spacecraft. It was monstrous, consuming the starlight around it, its shape obscured by shadows, save for the streaks of red energy pulsing across its surface, like the eyes of a predator. Elliot's breath hitched in his throat. He had entered someone else's territory. Then the voice returned, this time stronger. "Did you truly believe you could save her?" Elliot forced himself to remain calm. He didn't know who they were, but he knew they weren't going to let him continue. His grip on the controls tightened. His only choices: try to escape or face them. Before he could act, another signal broke through the comms, a voice he had been waiting for. "Elliot!" His heart leaped. "Selara! I'm here! I'm coming for you!" But her voice was different. "They've found you. You need to leave. Now!" Elliot shook his head. "No! I'm not leaving without you!" Another pause. Then Selara spoke again, her words sharper this time. "If you want to save me, you have to go where I am." His blood ran cold. She wasn't here. She had already been taken. Elliot's fingers trembled on the controls. He had come too far to turn back now. He wouldn't stop. He would find her. Reunion with Selara. Somewhere beyond the galaxy, 4:32 a.m. Earth time. Elliot had come too far to turn back. Before him, a desolate planet floated in the void of space. No light, no signs of life. It looked like a place forgotten for millions of years. But he knew Selara was there. She was waiting for him. Elliot piloted his ship closer, the planet's surface becoming clearer on his display. Scattered ruins of an ancient civilization stretched across the barren landscape. But in the middle of it all, a massive tower, pulsating with an ominous red glow. That was where Selara was being held, and that was also where his pursuers were waiting. Elliot took a deep breath. No weapons, no backup, only a ship powered by untested technology, and one reason to fight. He was going to get Selara out, no matter the cost. He adjusted the thrusters, guiding his ship straight into the planet's atmosphere. Elliot landed about a mile away from the tower, using the rocky terrain as cover. He stepped out of the cockpit, inhaling the thin, cold air of the alien world. The ground beneath him was cracked and lifeless, like the remnants of a long-dead planet. But he had no time to think about that. He had to find Selara, before it was too late. Elliot moved cautiously through the dark corridors of the tower. Everything was unnervingly silent. Then, a voice echoed through the intercoms. "Did you really think you could come here unnoticed?" Elliot froze. They had been expecting him. From the far end of the corridor, metal doors slid open, flooding the hall with an eerie red light. And then, shadows emerged, the Dravsir warriors. Elliot had nowhere to run. He stood his ground, gripping the silver crystal Selara had left him. One of the warriors stepped forward, his voice deep and sharp like metal scraping against metal. "You came to save her?" The warrior smirked, his glowing red eyes burning with amusement. "She cannot leave, and neither can you." Elliot tightened his grip. He knew he couldn't win against them in a fight, but he had something they didn't, a connection to Selara. He raised the crystal, letting its silver glow pierce through the darkness. Instantly, a whisper echoed in his mind. Selara. "Elliot, don't be afraid." Then, a surge of light exploded around him. The Dravsir warriors staggered back, startled by the sudden burst of energy. Elliot felt something inside the crystal, a direct link to Selara. And then, she appeared, not as a fading, incomplete presence, but as herself. Selara was fully manifesting, her silver light radiating with strength. And this time, she was no longer afraid. She raised her hand, and in an instant, a storm of silver energy erupted, sweeping across the entire corridor. The Dravsir soldiers were thrown back, their dark armor cracking under the sheer force of her power. Elliot shielded his eyes from the blinding light. Then, when the dust settled, it was just him and Selara. Selara turned to Elliot, her eyes filled with gratitude. But there was something else, a deep sadness. "Elliot, you saved me." His throat tightened. "Then don't go." Selara reached forward, her fingers phasing through his hand. "I wish I could stay." He gave a small smile. "I promised I would." But then, Selara lowered her gaze, her voice quieter. "You can't stay here." Elliot frowned. "What do you mean?" Selara looked at the crystal in his hand. "You connected with me through this. But if you don't leave now, you'll be trapped here just like I was." Elliot's breath caught in his throat. He had come too far to turn back. But if he stayed, he might never leave. Selara's expression softened, a bittersweet smile forming on her lips. "You have to go home, Elliot." He stared at her for a long moment. He didn't want to leave her behind, but he knew she was right. He had to take this knowledge back to Earth. The world had to know. They were no longer alone. Elliot took a deep breath, then nodded. "I'll go, but I won't stop." He stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I will find a way to come back." Selara smiled softly, her silver aura dimming slightly. "And I'll be waiting for you." Elliot stepped back, gripping the crystal tightly. He activated his ship's warp drive, the energy beginning to pull him away. A silver glow surrounded him, consuming everything. And in that final moment, before he vanished, Selara whispered, "Thank you, Elliot." Whispers from the universe. Earth. 1 month later, the sky was still blue. The towering buildings still stood tall. People continued their lives as if nothing had changed. But for Elliot, nothing was the same anymore. He had seen things no one on this planet had ever witnessed. He had met Selara, and more importantly, he had learned the truth. Humanity was not alone, but the most crucial part, they might be watched. Elliot stood on his apartment balcony, staring up at the night sky. The stars still shined, but now they were no longer just distant points of light. He knew now there were worlds beyond them, and somewhere out there, Selara was waiting. On his desk, the silver crystal still pulsed faintly. It was no longer just an ordinary object. It was the last connection he had with Selara. He had tried reaching out again, but no signal ever came back. Yet Elliot refused to believe that this was the end. She was still out there. And even if the signal was cut off, he knew she would find a way to send a message. Elliot had tried telling his story. He had attempted to warn people about the coordinates he had discovered, the destroyed planet, the Dravixir. But no one believed him. Scientific agencies dismissed his data. The government labeled it a hoax. Other scientists mocked him. Elliot just smiled. They didn't know, but he did. And if they refused to believe him now, they would believe when it was too late. That night, Elliot sat in his room, eyes fixed on the silver crystal. If Selara was still alive, she would try to contact him. He powered on his radio equipment, scanning through frequencies. Nothing. He exhaled, leaning back in his chair. Maybe he had lost her forever. Maybe he was too late. But then, a tiny signal appeared on the screen, faint, but it was there. Elliot bolted upright. This wasn't interference. It was a message. And just as he began decoding it, a voice whispered through the speakers. A voice he had been waiting for. "Elliot?" But there was something different this time. The signal was weaker, fading, as if something was trying to cut it off. He held his breath. "I'm still here." A smile formed on his lips. He had found her again. But this time, he wouldn't let her disappear. Elliot had returned to Earth, but his mind was elsewhere. He wouldn't stop. He would find a way back to Selara. And this time, he was bringing her home.